The Texas Hispanic Policy Foundation presents Our Story, hosted by the Foundation's chairman and president, Jason Villalba. Each week on Our Story, hear the personal and intimate stories of Hispanics all across Texas, told in their own voices. Our Story provides insight into a community of people who are literally and figuratively changing the complexion of the United States. This is who we are.
Welcome back to the Texas Hispanic Policy Foundation's Our Story. Each week, we bring you the stories of very interesting and fascinating people all across Texas, our Texas Latinos brothers and sisters. Today, we have one of my friends from the legislature and one of the most accomplished members of the Texas Legislature who's been able to do some amazing things in a very short period of time. She and I became friends when she started in 2015 in the legislature, and we've just maintained our friendship because she's more than a legislator, a wonderful human being in person. I'd like to introduce you to Representative Ina Minjarez. Ina, how are you today?
I'm doing good, my friend. It's good to reconnect with you.
Well, it's great that you had some time for me. I know you're in the middle of the legislative session this year, and I know how busy you are. So thank you for taking time. How are you? How have you been? How is the legislative session in this very unusual time down in the Capitol?
I have been great. I've been blessed. Luckily, my family have all been safe. None have caught COVID. My husband's doing well in his employment. We're just truly blessed. Capitol session is very different, unlike anything I've ever experienced in the short time I've been there. Hallways are dead. We haven't been on the floor very much. And really, we're doing business by Zoom and WebEx. So even though we can't maybe physically be in the building as much as we're used to and have face-to-face meetings, the work continues, but it's just done, over technology.
When you're on the floor, is it possible to engage with your fellow members? I know inside the rail, it's a very collegial place. I mean, some of my best friendships were formed during that time. Can you do that now, or as the pandemic and the virus kept you from being able to really get close to folks?
Well, to a degree, we are on the floor. We are wearing masks. It's just, to me, it's impossible to socially distance on that floor. There's just too many of us. And we've not been on the floor, I think, long enough to truly have the time to socialize and get to know with one another. I think, some of the new members I've gotten to meet, Lacey Hull is one, but really there's really not been time on the floor to really get to know one another. And yeah, that has really been a hindrance. I've not really seen many of my colleagues beyond just checking in, at the desk and leaving.
It's such an interesting time. I mean, everything from business to commerce to politics has been changed by this virus. And so I'm always curious to hear the stories of people who are engaging in different ways during this time. But, with respect to your story, and I want to go back to the very beginning and talk about your upbringing in El Paso and in the rest of Texas. Mm-hmm. I think the listeners should know how really impactful you've been in the legislature in the period of time that you've been there. You came in during a 2015 shortened session, or shortened period of the session, but since then have really just knocked the cover off the ball in so many different ways. And I want to go back to the beginning and talk to you about your parents and your grandparents and your story so that we can understand what makes you so effective. I mean, we talk to a lot of amazing Latinas on the show, and I just am always fascinated by their story. So let's go back. You were born in El Paso. Tell me a little bit about your upbringing and your parents and maybe your grandparents, if they're part of your life at that time.
Born and raised in El Paso. My home is just a few feet from the Rio Grande River. Right now, as of today, you can see construction of like the border wall, this huge fence. It was very common when I grew up to see Border Patrol on bikes in our neighborhoods. It was normal to see people crossing from Juarez into El Paso, I'm sorry. That was just normal way of life. To me, it was very normal that was my upbringing. So parents, hardworking, hard ethics, father, construction worker, taught himself the trade, built his way up to owning a small concrete business. My mom was a cafeteria cashier at my local elementary school, very much pushed the importance of education on my sister and myself. I think for my father, he didn't have sons. He knew he had two daughters. And for him, I think his fear was he never wanted us to be dependent on a man. He wanted us to be self-sufficient, independent, and to be educated. And the extended family, they didn't have opportunities to go to college and get a degree. So for him and my mom, it was important that their lot in life was our girls got to get educated. That's what we have to do. That's why we're here for. And we want to make sure that they do better in life than we did.
How about grandparents? Were grandparents involved in your life much? Or are they a part of the close-knit family that we always hear about? Or were they more distant, or had they passed?
No, my grandparents were around. My mom's mom, affectionately call her skinny grandma. She was always in my life. I still remember to this day loved going to stay with her because she would make me endless amounts of Kool-Aid with tons of sugar. And I would play with her makeup. And I love my skinny grandma. She was a single mother, raised her kids. My grandfather, I never met him. He had deserted the family, and she was a custodian at Providence Hospital. So she really dedicated her life to just being independent, raising her kids. And she was really just the one grandparent I think that was really more present in my life. My dad's parents, lovingly, my dad's mom was, 4'9". Lovingly refer to her as my fat grandma.
Oh, no.
Yeah, lovingly.
And yet skinny grandma was one feeding you the Kool-Aid with all the sugar.
Yes, exactly. I have my fat grandma and my grandpa. My grandpa, I from what I remember, I think he had worked with the sanitation department. But the memories I have, of him drinking Tang in the morning, he would sit in front of the house all day long drinking Tang, and I think he would put some tequila in there.
Well, Tang was developed by NASA, so he was following the science of the day for sure.
Yeah, but my grandpa, my fat grandma, big family. They had 12 kids. Skinny grandma, I think there were 6 of them. So my grandparents came from big families.
So you're third generation Texan. It doesn't sound like you've got an immigrant background at all. Were any of the grandparents from Mexico?
From what I know, my paternal great grandfather, they came from Spain. If you look at me, I am, brown hair, dark brown eyes. Great grandfather, very light complected, blue, clear eyes. But I never knew really much more about my great grandparents on either side of the family. I was very much rooted in being born and raised in Texas. Don't know very much about family that, came from Mexico.
Texas is a part of my history as well. And like
Mm-hmm.
you, our great grandparents from Spain. So
Mm-hmm.
a little bit lighter skin. My father has green eyes, which is unusual, and very light skin for Latino, but also from that Spanish heritage. So you're close to your mom and dad. What I found in having these conversations with so many people is there's one parent that may be a little more influential with respect to directing you on your path, either to education or to politics. Was that your case, or did both parents contribute equally in that regard? Now, I know that both parents contribute equally in your life, and I'm not trying to say one's
Sure.
favored over the other, but usually there's an influence that you can point to.
So the reality is my father was a provider, and he worked, he was in the, like I said, construction, concrete business. He had to work. He really could not ever be home. He would be up at 3 a.m. to go do a pour at 5 o'clock and wouldn't get home until 10, 11 o'clock at night. So it's just, he had to make a living for the family. So he couldn't be around as much as me and my sister, of course, had wanted him to be. So my mom was really the foundation, and she just, at a small, when I was young, she would have me reading books when I would want to go play outside. She wasn't having it. I remember she had me reading a book on Marie Curie, and she would give me a list of like 20 vocabulary words and say, okay, I want you to go learn to use a dictionary, give me the definition, and then I want you to write sentences with these words.
Wow.
And
like a
that's
teacher.
Like a teacher, exactly,
Yeah.
like a teacher. And that's how she kept us busy. She really didn't want us, playing outside. She just was very much grounded and rooted in learning. She is a voracious reader. She loves it. She graduated, she finished the 8th grade and married my dad when she was 15. And I wonder, had she had the opportunity to really finish high school and go to college, I think she would have been an amazing lawyer, because she's just incredibly intelligent and loves to read. But for me, Jason, I remember one summer, I don't remember how old I was. She had me watching the Iran-Contra affairs on CNN. And I did not understand what was going on, but she would tell me, I want you to watch this. and that's when I kind of knew who the players were.
So it sounds to me like your mother was the teacher in the household. Obviously, you saw her at school every day, but she's also now drilling you on vocabulary and making sure you're reading. Had she wanted to go to college herself and just didn't go, or what happened in that situation?
Well, times were different back then. My grandma, my skinny grandma, here she is, custodian at a hospital, having to also provide for her family, can't really be home. And back then, where they were from, I mean, you just got married young, right? And just the thought of college was not even an option. She didn't think that was within reach. It's not like education was instilled in them. And so I think for her, she would have loved to have gone to college. It just wasn't there wasn't an opportunity or a reality for her.
But both your mom and your dad were quite encouraging of you. So they understood that this was the path to success. Or were you the oldest or the youngest in your family?
Oh, I'm the baby.
Oh, so you're the baby. Did your sister end up going to college as well?
She was the first out of the whole extended family to go to college. Yeah.
So she ended up being the first, blazing the trail for you. And you do very well in undergrad, not undergraduate, but in high school, and then have scholarships to Notre Dame. Now, what brought you to Notre Dame? Why Notre Dame? And what was it like to have that as a goal and, meet that goal, meet that objective?
Well, the funny thing, I never thought Notre Dame wasn't even on the map for me. I wanted to go to college in California. I had this fixation that I wanted to go move to California. And I remember my mom was the one that said, hey, why don't you apply to Notre Dame, give it a shot? And I said, okay, fine. And I literally, I think, turned in the application like the day before it was due. Didn't think I would get in. And remember getting the envelope. It was, normally when you get like a small envelope, it's a rejection, right? It was a little envelope, so I thought I got rejected, and I opened it, and it was a congratulations, you made it in letter.
Wow.
Yeah.
That must have been quite a joy in the family. Like you, was one of the first in my family, actually the first in my family to go to college. And so I didn't know much about the process, and I didn't know where to apply or what to apply to. I got the letter, and the first thing I thought of when I got in was that this is great. I'm excited. But how am I going to pay for this? Mm-hmm. So what was the process then? Because that was the one that scared me to death. It's like, we don't have any money. I mean, my dad was a groceryman, how did you guys work through that process?
I just remember I had applied for a lot of scholarships. I did get a decent financial aid package, but I remember thinking, Jason, I didn't even know where Notre Dame was located. I did not know where it was. I got an opportunity. They had offered me, there was a program for minority students to go to Notre Dame during the summer before school started so that we can get our feet wet. And so I decided to go ahead and do that. But I remember I had told my mom, I mean, how can we afford this? I remember her saying, if I have to scrub floors day and night to help you, I'm going to do that. we'll make it work. And, you need to get loans. And yeah, so I had to get loans, which I'm still paying to this day.
Mm.
It's just the reality. But I remember my mom said, don't let that stop you. We're going to help you. Go get those loans, keep pushing for those scholarships and the financial aid, and you need to go. And for them, they wanted me to leave Texas. They told me, get out of the state, go learn something new, go meet new people. If you decide to come back, that's because you want to come back, but go experience life outside of what you know.
So my demographics aren't so good up in the Midwestern part of the country, but I'm pretty sure there aren't a lot of Latinos in that part of the country, particularly at Notre Dame. What was it like being a fish out of water for the first time? I mean, El Paso is obviously very Hispanic, and you have lots of people that look like you and come from your background. And my guess is that Indiana wasn't like that.
Oh, it was a culture shock. I remember flying over Indiana and seeing how flat it was and thinking, what did I do? Why did I make the right decision to come here? It was a culture shock. And just in terms of the weather, I mean, I have never known cold weather, how bad it could be until I got there, not seeing the sun for months on end. But I mean, I truly was a minority. I understood like what it was to be one of a few students of color there. I met some of the greatest people that I'm still friends with to this day. I think we formed a family there. We were a support system. Good people. And I learned a lot, and I just learned it was okay. I could make it in a different community. I could make it.
I think it strengthens us, right?
Yes.
I think if we're forced outside of our comfort zone and we need to perform not only academically, but socially in an environment that's different than what we're comfortable in and where we grew up, that it makes us stronger, and it enables us to really to integrate into any situation. Did you ever have any resistance from students up there? Was there ever any sort of, I don't like to use the word racism because I think that's overused, but certainly pushback or sort of otherness? I mean, I got otherness a lot.
Yeah.
And I wonder how that was at Notre Dame.
I remember one time I was with a group of friends, and I remember we were visiting another girlfriend of ours in a dorm. And usually, so like Friday nights, they would have they were called SYRs, like these dances. And of course, hey, students would be drinking. I remember being with a group of friends in this dorm, and then some guys came out of a room and said something like, what did they say? Something like, oh, it's like the multicultural group. It was something like I can't remember the term, but they were obviously saying something because we were, I'm Latina. One of my friends is Black. My other friend was Filipino. Like we were all different races, but they were saying it in a derogatory way. Another time I remember that someone had wrote an editorial in the Notre Dame Observer, something along the lines of like Latinos coming, that our bloodline, we came from savages.
Good Lord.
Yeah, things like that.
That was allowed in the newspaper?
They allowed that in there. Yeah.
Bloodline of savages. My
Bloodline of savages.
goodness.
I remember that.
Wow. Hopefully you wrote
yeah.
a response letter to the editor.
So yeah, I mean, there were definitely moments like that. But in terms of a one-on-one experience of being treated badly because of who I am and my race, no. But I think just in terms of collectively, yeah, targeted, of course. Yeah, had those moments sometimes.
We're so fortunate as Latinos because we do, I think, experience some of that resistance, some of that otherness, and sometimes blatant racism. It's rare, but it happens. But, our brothers and sisters in the African American community and people who are in the country for the first time, they experience so much more. And so while I think I recognize that, we had to kind of face some headwinds, it wasn't as bad as what some of the others do. But yet again, I think that makes us stronger. Did you feel that way as well, that sort of adversity sort of strengthens you?
It did. I think for me, Jason, like I remember and I look back, I see like what's going on now. And it makes me reflect, I think, because of the pandemic, I tend to have a lot of time to just think. I remember I was resentful. I think I grew up when I was in college. I felt like I became very militant. Like I just felt like I was angry, and I very much was all about viva la raza. Like I just was very angry, and just remember being somewhat militant, and just kind of feeling like it's me against the world, right? It's the world isn't fair, and being angry. But I think over time, as I grew up and moved on and came back to Texas, I think it's just a level of maturity happened, and you learn from those experiences. But yes, it made me stronger. But again, I think it made me angry at one point. I remember becoming militant, but then over time, as I grew and had experiences, I learned from them. And yes, you become stronger.
So let's talk about that militancy that, again, over time and as you age and mature, it changes. But I wonder if was that a influential in shaping your politics? One of the conversations I have with lots of my guests are that, as Latinos, we're really all across the spectrum, from conservative to progressive and everything in between. But I'm always curious, because we are so disparate in that way, what were the drivers in our politics? You're a Democrat today. I don't know if you identify as progressive. I know you're thoughtful and always an effective member of the legislature, but I'd love to hear about your politics, number one. And then two, what was that? I mean, you could have easily ended up, as a Republican and,
Yeah.
center right world, but yet you're not. And why was that? And was that driven by some of your collegiate experience, or was that something that you experienced younger?
When I was younger, I remember my parents, they worked for, back in the day, they worked at a manufacturing plant. They used to sew jeans. It was called the Farah manufacturing plant in El Paso. And there in history, it's noted that they had one of the biggest walkouts, protests. And my parents were part of that. They protested horrible working conditions, and they actually marched with Cesar Chavez over it. And so I remember just listening to the stories that my parents would tell me about that. I remember my dad, Jason, like I remember when he would be home at night, being at the table, crying to my mom and listening to like just what he went through at the construction sites, the discrimination he faced. I remember taking that in. I remember, and then growing up when he didn't have the education, he didn't have the business background, but he had the talent. He taught himself how do you teach yourself the construction industry? That just amazes me that my dad did that.
Right.
And he was the talent, but he didn't have the business background, and he had partners in this small business that really caught the shots, and my dad was in the dark, and I'm still really resentful to this day about it. I felt he was taken advantage of. And it's seeing things like that, I think, that molded my politics. I understand the importance of small business, what he was able to do to get, food on the table and get my sister and I educated and pay the bills. My mom, who, look, she is a strong woman. They're Catholic, but my mom is very much, pro-choice. I think all of that molded me. But I think I'm just one that I've learned, I'm just who I am, Jason. I cannot be what other people want me to be. I believe in what I believe in. And I think I tend to be a moderate. In my eyes, I think I'm a moderate. I don't think I'm progressive, although some people think that I am. I think it's just, if I like the policy, if it's a good outcome, if it's good for people, I'm all about it. But I think, I tend to be, I'm a champion for small business. So there's just, I think I cross the aisle on a lot of different policies, but I always try to evaluate it on, is it good for families? Is it good for people? Then I'm all for it.
One of the benefits of being in the Texas legislature versus the United States Congress is that, Texas in our legislature deals with the bread and butter issues impacting families. So regardless of your politics, progressive or conservative, it's really easy to be a good public servant by focusing on the issues that you have focused on, right? I mean, it's about small business. It's about the people who work hard. It's about providing that safety net. Those really should transcend politics. Now, they don't in DC, but
Right.
most of the time they do in Austin. My fear of what's happening in Austin, or what has happened in DC, this is that it could follow the steps of DC. Now, you were a part of the opening conversations at the legislature this year where some of that crept in. Do you see the Texas legislature going in that direction where everything is just so partisan and everything is so divisive? When I was there in, the last decade or so, it felt like in the beginning it was about making sure that we helped families. But
Right.
then towards the end, with the advent of some of the more fringy right-wing movements like Tea Party and now Trumpism, it's changed. Has that continued to evolve like that, or has it gone back to the center? What is your experience with that?
We've got a couple new members that they tried, during the day when we were debating the rules, they, of course, introduced an amendment to prevent Democrats from having chairmanships. So you're always going to have one or two of those new representatives or current representatives that want things to be partisan. But that morning, I will say I was very, I was proud of my colleague. Briscoe Kane took the mic. I didn't know what he was going to say. And he basically said, we are not going to be Washington, D.C. This is a bad amendment. We should be working together. We should have Democratic chairs. And that really made me feel better about things. Now, do I predict that there's going to be some social issues that, of course, that the super far right wants? Of course, I think they're going to be brought to the floor. But that's the reason why I love the Texas House, is that we work together, we have our debates, but we are effective. And that's why I have no desire to go to DC. It does not attract me at all.
You've been so effective at the state level. I know that there are people urging you to go to Washington, and you would be fabulous there. But it's a double-edged sword, because talent like yours transcends the state. And yet we need talented people like you in Austin and in our current government. So I'll say to you, I'll support you if you leave, but don't leave.
Thank you.
So I skipped over law school. You left Notre Dame. Did you work in between law school, or did you go straight to law school? And why St. Mary's, right? Why St. Mary's?
Straight to law school. I wanted to come back to Texas. And I remember my dad would talk about some of his friends who were lawyers in El Paso that went to St. Mary's. And so I did my research on St. Mary's law, and I thought that was the perfect place. And I wanted to come to San Antonio. I admired the city for so long. Being from El Paso, I had family that had lived here, and I had visited when I was small. And I think San Antonio would be a perfect place for me to start my life.
I lived in San Antonio in my formative years, and really for me, it's a second home. When I dream, I often dream in San Antonio, and I love that community. It's just so vibrant and beautiful, and it's not multicultural. It's mainly Latinos, but they are so embracing down there, and it's just such a good place to be, have a family and to raise a family. So I look forward to getting down there soon and again. So you finish up at St. Mary's, you go into the DA's office. How does that work? I think that's where you probably started your focus on social justice much earlier, but my guess is your work in the DA's office really began to crystallize your focus.
It did. I had gotten placed in a specialty court. So my misdemeanor, I got my start litigating domestic violence cases. So prosecuting domestic violence cases. I was there for a while, and then got promoted to felony, and I was still within the family justice unit. And so then I started taking on prosecuting sexual crimes against children, which was a big lift. That's really emotionally draining to do, but I think that's really was the start of when I had so much passion for anything policy-wise focused on children.
How does a normal person do that? Right? I mean, honestly, because I've read the cases. Fortunately, I never had to see the photographs or meet the children or see the perpetrators. I don't know how you keep it together, how you kept it together during that time. What do you do to deal with that?
It was hard. There'd be times I would cry reviewing a case file. You know what? That's probably around the time that I started little by little, started running to get my stress out. I was kickboxing at the time. Yeah, you've got to try to figure out a way to leave the work at the courthouse and come home and be somewhat, have some peace in your life. It's hard though.
Yeah, I can't imagine that. I mean, anytime I pick up the newspaper and read an article and so emotionally charged up afterwards and angry and sad all at the same time that I just don't know how I could have done that for a living. And someone as kind and polite as you, I was like, how does she do that? How does she do that during that time? So you spent some time there and then started your own practice.
I did. So in between that time, I actually that's when I got into politics. I had decided to run for a county court at law bench. This was in 2006. So I was very green, very naive, no idea how you run a campaign, but I went up against a 20-year incumbent. And I think I had just lost by 0.7% on that first race. And then at that time, I decided to leave the DA's office and get more experience. So I went out on my own, did criminal defense, and then started representing kids in the foster care system as an ad litem. And I also represented parents facing their termination of their parental rights. So I was pretty busy.
That must have been rewarding after some of the things that you'd had to see. And so, you develop as a lawyer across these different types of cases and now you're in politics and now you're thinking about politics. Tell me about your first race for State House. How did that develop? How did it go? I know you won under unique circumstances just because it was so late in the session, but tell me about that process.
I never, ever thought I would ever be in the Texas House. It wasn't even on my radar. So I had just come off, at the time, so it was 2015, I had already been litigating for 15 years. I'd been in the courts every day. This last time I was working with a wonderful labor law firm, great boss, Javier Espinosa. But, Jason, I don't know. I joke around that I don't know if I was going through a midlife crisis professionally. I just felt very tired from litigating and felt like I wanted to do something new. So at the time, my husband said, why don't you take some time off? Hey, take some time off, figure out what your next step is going to be if you want to go back to school. Whatever you want to do, I will be supportive. I just don't want you coming home angry all the time and taking it out on me. So I remember I did. It was great. I took some time off and, trying to figure out what I was going to do. And there was this at the time, there were all these special elections going on. So, Leticia Van de Putte had left her seat to run for lieutenant governor. So that created a vacancy. My state rep at the time, Jose Menendez, and then Trey Martinez Fisher were both vying for her Senate seat. So special election happens, Jose Menendez wins, and I don't know what it was. It was like an inner voice telling me something was pushing me. And I remember Googling, what does a state rep do? Because I just didn't remember. And I thought, man, if I litigated in the courts for 15 years, representing kids, victims of crime, small businesses, shoot, I can litigate at the Capitol. I can actually, instead of, applying the law, I can make it. And remember, I talked to my husband. We had Big Red and barbacoa tacos at our hole in the wall. And I told him I wanted to do it. And he thought I was crazy. He was like, I thought you were done with politics. And I said, I don't know what it is. It's like, I can't explain it. It's this force of nature that is pushing me to do this. And he said, all right, well, if you're all in, then we're all in. I mean, we're going to go full throttle. Rest is history. Threw my name in the ring. And out of, I think it was 4 or 5 of us, ended up in a runoff and then ended up heading over to Austin on the floor for the end of the 84th legislative session.
People who watch the legislature or who follow politics in Texas probably think of members as just being so steeped in it and prepared and ready to go. But my experience, much like yours, when I decided to run for office and won my first race, was like you. I'm like, well, I know all about Washington, what they do up there. I've been following that since I was a kid, but I don't know much about the state legislature. And I had to study up like you did and
Hmm.
just sort of figure out what the process was. But I think your experience is one that many of us have as we enter the legislature, because it's not on television, it's not always in the newspapers, and so that what it is that the legislature does, I think, is something that's new to a lot of us. But what I found when I got there was that it was a much bigger part of my life and the life of my family and neighbors and relatives and community and state than anything in Washington. So you get to the legislature. Now, your first session is a bit shortened by the fact that it was a special election. Tell me about that first full session. You, of course, were the number one candidate and rock star that year, winning Freshman of the Year from the vaunted Texas Monthly magazine. Tell me about that first session.
First session, I remember, wow. So before session had started, Speaker Strauss had asked me to be part of a working group, a bipartisan working group he put together to start working on foster care reform, because that was the year that federal judge had deemed the foster care system a hot mess in Texas, which it is. So I was working months before we went into session with a group of wonderful legislators that are also very passionate about foster care. And that was really neat to here I am, the newbie, to be put into this work group with senior members. And so as soon as session started, I mean, that was an emergency item. And to me, it just seemed I was busy. It just seemed to never stop. And I was just focused on making sure that those bills passed. And then, I had a lot of fun time with amendments. I don't know what it was about, you know how it is. If you have a bill, but it's not moving, but maybe you can attach it as an amendment. I was just really able to do that. And I wasn't thinking about, oh, I want the glory. I wasn't vying to be, freshman of the year. It was just, I got work to do. I've got to produce. I've got to bring wins home. But it was nice. It was nice to have that acknowledgement by Texas Monthly. But it was a very productive session. But the stars aligned, I think.
Well, not only did the stars align, but I think your skill, not only as a legislator and as a lawyer, but as a person, I think were very effective. I mean, the reason that people are effective in the Texas legislature goes beyond sheer intellect, which you certainly have, but I think it also is driven largely by your ability to get along with others. And that, I
Hmm.
think, is what really identifies those who are going to be successful. And I think you did a really good job of cultivating relationships across the political aisle, right? I mean,
Right.
it sounds like that was something that was always important. You're probably natural, is my guess.
I think it was. But what I tell people is when I remember being the newbie and being somewhat intimidated, I still remember the day that I met all of you all when I got at the swearing in on the floor when I came in. But I remember how welcoming everybody was and everybody wanted to help. And I specifically remember Patricia Harless took me under her wing. She's a Republican but she was so welcoming. Everybody, Frulo was another one that always checked on me every day at the desk, Alma Allen. And I just felt very welcomed. And then I understood I got to know everybody. I need to take time to meet everybody because that's what it's about. You're not going to get anything done if you don't have key relationships with members on that floor. And you cannot stick to your own party. There's no way.
It's a relationship game, and it's something that so many legislators don't always embrace. And I
Hmm.
think you did, and that was one of the reasons that you were so successful. So now you're a senior, you're moving up in the process. I know that committee appointments will be out soon, so I'll be calling you Chairman Minjarez next time we speak. But I would like to hear about a couple of issues that you care about. What is it that is really important to you as the session begins? What are the areas you're focusing on? And where do you think you can have the biggest impact during this very unusual session?
I'm going to continue my work with foster care reform. There's an advocate, Carrie Wilcoxon, here in San Antonio, who she's a former investigator with CPS, very passionate, and we've teamed up together. She has been at the front line and she has a very unique view of things within the system that need to be changed. And so we've teamed up together to try to get some good work done within the system. It's Child Protective Services is such a big department, and there's so much that needs to be fixed, and it can't be done in one legislative session. So I'll be continuing my work in that area. I had asked last session, people thought I was crazy, but I did. I had asked Speaker Bonin to be put on appropriations when my colleague, Justin Rodriguez, left the legislature to become a commissioner in Bexar County. And I really felt that I need to learn the budget. That is the foundation of the legislature. That is the foundation of all of our bills. And I wanted to get in there and really learn how revenue works and how things are funded, and really learned a lot. And I've asked, I have requested to stay on because there's so much more to learn. And I'm hoping that I get to stay on that committee and build on that, and hopefully, help mold the budget, especially in light of COVID and what's happened with oil and gas. We have our challenges budget wise this legislative session. And, those are the two areas I think that I'm really, really devoted to, but I will always be a voice for children. People ask me, why don't you want to be on human services anymore? And I did that one session, but I just found that I want to continue learning. It's important for me. In order to stay engaged, I have to be learning something new. And I always want to spread my wings and learn from different committees.
Well, you're a glutton for punishment because appropriations for our listeners begins every morning about 7 a.m. And it's 5 days a week in the beginning of session all the way through. So while the rest of the legislature are sleeping in or spending time with family, you're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed in the legislature and appropriations chamber at 7 a.m., probably 6:30, which means getting up at 5 or 5:30 to be ready for that committee. And so I commend anyone that is on appropriations, but I will say that you learn more on appropriations than I think any other committee, just because, like you say, it is the backbone of everything that we do, and everything that we do from a financial perspective in the state runs through that committee. And even things that are social in nature run through that committee because everything costs money. And so, so you're learning a great deal, and it'll serve you well as you move forward. I want to talk quickly about conventional wisdom about Texas Hispanics and, what people who are not Latinos in Texas, their conventional wisdom, what do they perceive about us that you would say, that's not really who we are? Dispelling myths is a big part of what I like to do on this show and then also in our foundation. So one of the things I like to do is tie together some of the things that do bind us, like, focus on education, strong parents, strong maternal instincts from our ancestors, but also some things that people think about us that just isn't true. What would you say is one of those areas?
I mean, I guess in general, they think we all think alike, that we all have the same type of values. And I think our value systems are so different. I think they lump us all into one group. I think they all assume, for example, they all do assume that we're all Democrats, which we're not. Right. I think they all assume we speak Spanish, which not all of us do. I am one. And I think they think our upbringings are all the same. I think they all also assume maybe that immigration is the number one topic or number one issue that we're all concerned about, which isn't true for all of us. So I think that there's basic blanketed assumptions that they make about Latinos.
I think you seized on some important ones, and this is recurring, and this is the issue of language. I don't speak Spanish. Mm-hmm. The reason I don't speak Spanish is because I grew up in Dallas, Texas. My parents were educated in public schools in Dallas, Texas in the 1950s, where they were told, don't speak Spanish at home, and we're not going to speak Spanish here at school. And so they lost their Spanish, which they had at home.
They probably got hit, right? They probably got hit for speaking
it slapped on the wrist with a ruler.
Yep.
And so, they grew up getting away from Spanish. And so as the children of those parents, we never spoke it in the home, and it never became part of our history. But I think there are a lot of us out here who don't speak Spanish. I think half my guests so far are non-Spanish speakers. How did that happen? Was it a similar story for you guys in your household?
Similar, but I think for my parents, I remember my mom, they had this belief that they didn't want me or my sister having an accent when we spoke English. They felt that if Spanish was our first language, that we were going to have an accent. And my parents, they regret it now. They do wish that they had taught us Spanish and that we spoke Spanish in the home. Now they understand there was a value to it, to know different languages, but they just were very much, I mean, that's how they were brought up, Jason, the same as your parents. When they were in school, if they spoke Spanish, they got hit with that ruler.
Oh, yeah.
I remember myself being in elementary school, that I was in my kindergarten class. I was put into a class with Spanish speaking kids. I remember it was, and so I was in that class specifically to help the Spanish speaking kids learn English. I forgot the term, what it was called, the class. But I remember I said a Spanish word, and I remember getting in trouble, and I got hit with the ruler.
Wow.
I remember that. And that was 1980. I remember that. But so it was like, that's how you were taught. We were instilled speaking Spanish is wrong. It leads you to getting hit. It's a punishment. But I remember my mom and dad were very much like, you need to speak English. You need to learn English really well. You need to speak it well to be successful in this country. And it wasn't because they were ashamed. It was because they faced consequences growing up speaking Spanish.
I think that's the story for many of us. And in hindsight, I wish I had at least learned Spanish. I have some Spanish, and of course I can probably get by if I really, really needed to, but I'm not at all fluent. And I try to encourage my daughters and my son to speak Spanish if they can, or to learn it or take it in school, knowing that how valuable it can be. But it is one of those issues that comes up quite a bit. And we just, it's not something that all of us have. One thing that I think we do all have is that we love Big Red and barbacoa tacos.
Yes.
And I don't know why, but everybody I talk to who is Hispanic, like me, grew up, especially if they grew up in the San Antonio area or El Paso, man, Big Red was a big part of my upbringing. And my son, who's 7, he loves Big Red. But my wife says he can't have it all the time because it's got a lot of sugar.
So bad for you. It's so bad for you, but it's so good.
Oh, it's so good. And with tacos, my goodness. Well, I miss getting down to your neighborhood and your part of the state. I'll be down hopefully after the vaccine starts to take hold and we can spend some time over some tacos and some Big Red. I want to thank you for taking time today to speak with our story and tell your story. I mean, again, I think the future is so bright with you, and I look forward to seeing what you're going to do. We'll close with that question is, look, what's in the future? You've already said you're ruling out Washington, which I'm not going to hold you to because everyone says that. But what would you like to see the next 10 years look like for you?
I just want to continue being someone that can bring about good change. I don't ask for a lot. I just want to be happy. I just want to continue serving as long as I'm able to, and just bring about good change for the people of Texas, and very much want to continue being grounded with my family.
Well, you do an amazing job, and Texas is blessed to have your leadership. I am hopeful that you continue to take an active role in leadership, not only at the state level, but, maybe statewide at some point in time, maybe Washington down the road. We just need fresh and smart voices like yours to make the differences that are so necessary in our state. So God bless you. Thank you, Representative, for being on today.
Thank you, my friend.
God bless, guys. Talk to you soon.
The Texas Hispanic Policy Foundation would like to thank you for joining us today on Our Story. You can find more information about the foundation at www.txhpf.org, on Facebook on the Texas Hispanic Policy Foundation page, or on Twitter @TexHPF. Please join us next week on Our Story, a podcast dedicated to the voices of Texas Hispanics.